This is the Public Utility Advisory Board meeting for November 17th, 2022. Christina, can you please call the roll?
Michael Talcott.
Here.
David McDowell.
Here.
Bridget McCandless. Sherry Tyndall. Here. Anthony Jeremita.
Here.
Les Boatwright.
Here.
Okay. And Dr. McCandless is no longer going to be with us. We got her resignation. She will be joining the City Council. So we want to thank Dr. McCandless for her time on the board and wish her the best of luck with City Council. Does anybody have anything else to say? Okay. The minutes for October 27th, 2022. We need a motion to, does anybody have any changes? Or, because I noticed one thing, and Ms. Tyndall did too. PUAB members present, and then PUAB members present again. She should be not present. That would be the only change that I noticed. Anybody else have anything?
Otherwise, I move to approve.
Okay,
I'll second that.
we have a motion and a second. Anybody, any discussion? All right, let's call the roll.
Michael Talcott.
Yes.
David McDowell.
Yes.
Sherry Tyndall.
Yes.
Anthony Jeremita.
Yes.
Les Boatwright.
Yes.
All right. The next thing on the agenda is presentation, IPL H5 combustion turbine repair. Mr. Nail.
Good afternoon, board members. This is the same presentation that was done for the study session this past Monday night, but just due to the timing of when the different meetings are, they got it first, but we did send you all a copy in advance just so you'd have the benefit of seeing that. And then the intent right now is that this would show up on the council agenda for the December 5th meeting. With the council's rule of procedure that everything has to be published 2 weeks before, or 2 Fridays before the meeting, we didn't have a final quote in from GE in time to support that. So the request will be on the December 5th agenda. So the request that we're asking you to endorse is recommend an approval of a purchase order to GE to inspect and repair the turbine section of H5 turbine. As a reminder, this is one of our 2 gas-fired turbines, so it's called on most frequently by SPP when it's available. It was out all of last year because of a generator fault, and during the time it took to find and repair the generator fault, when we put the thing back together this summer, there was a vibration on the turbine end, which is the opposite end of the machine. And we worked all through the summer and fall with GE to try to identify the source of the vibration. We've exhausted everything we can do locally. So the next step is to hand this off to GE and have them take it apart and find and fix the source of that vibration. The problem is, that's a high-speed machine, and so obviously even a very small vibration is a problem. And when you get it up to full speed and try to energize the generator, it goes up to the point that it trips the unit off. So we cannot run it in this condition, and it requires that vibration to be fixed in order to move ahead. This is just again a reminder, this is the generator end that we fixed last year, big giant rotating piece of metal. This is the turbine end. A lot of parts, very, very tight tolerances. We don't know yet the cause of the vibration, but in general terms, when a piece of metal like that sits for a long period of time, metal actually sags, bearings deform, and we're talking thousandths of an inch tolerance. So any place that might have shifted just a bit and is causing a rub, we've not been able to find it, but GE with their more advanced facilities hopefully they'll be able to resolve that. The purchase order request, and it's going to come in, the request comes in at just under $2 million, adding a 10% factor for any unknowns and possible change orders. The request that we'll be submitting to the council is for $2,199,000 and change. And the exact amount will be obviously on the request that we submit to the council. Now, this includes a full scope of activities. The sooner they discover and can fix the cause of the vibration, the less work that would be entailed. Now, I can't tell you, there's no crystal ball that we can say how much less or how much more, but this is in their best engineering judgment, this is the estimate for those repairs. Now, in comparison, our request for repairing the generator was $1.9 million. It came in about 1.3. So GE is very responsible. They are very good. I mean, I know there's companies out there, if you give them a purchase order for $2 million, it's going to cost $2 million one way or another. GE doesn't operate that way. They've worked very well with us. And so I trust them to do this in the most efficient way possible. But the purchase order request will cover what we think could be the cost of those repairs. Now, just as justification for moving ahead with this, reminder that last year when we first brought the turbine up as an issue, we had GE representatives with us, and they explained a little bit about those turbines and the life expectancy. They use as a benchmark 5,000 fired startups and 200,000 operating hours as what they consider a unit ready for a life extension project. Ours only had just under 3,000 starts and only 23,654 hours. That's about 12% of what they consider end-of-life operating hours. We're a little over half on the number of fired starts. So in their estimation, and when Burns and McDonnell reviewed it a couple of years ago for their presentation, both of them estimated that these units could easily last another 20 years if maintained. So that's the decision we have to make. And again, comparison, there's approximately 3,000 of these machines that are still in operation today, and 60% of all of them ever built are still in operation today. So they're robust machines. They've got a lot of life in them. Further justification for why we would want to make this repair. As the black line there shows our typical wind pattern over a 48-hour period, and that is pretty typical. Wind dies down in the early morning hours, comes back up in the evening, does the same thing again overnight. The wind dies down, comes back up. That type of an operating profile is very difficult for a boiler-based plant to compete with. It takes a lot of energy to start up a boiler plant and get it up to operating condition. And then you need a lot of operating time to make up the cost, because the whole time, 10, 12 hours or more that you're starting up that unit, it's not making any money. So your operating time has to balance that out. So boiler plants, they don't like this type of operation because it really makes it difficult for them to manage. The result is when the wind dies off, it causes a lot of volatility in the pricing. And the blue line is that pricing volatility that we see in the market. Fast start resources that don't take 10 or 12 hours, that you can start up, run for a couple of hours and shut down, that's where they make their money, is covering those shortfalls. Our units get called on frequently by Southwest Power Pool in those afternoon, early evening hours. And later in the presentation, I actually have some numbers for what we've done this past year. But that's the reality of the market here in Southwest Power Pool. Southwest Power Pool relies on having resources like these combustion turbines to help fill that gap. And us being able to provide that service to Southwest Power Pool benefits us. Again, just more of that same information. renewables are an ever-increasing share. Last month, Mr. McDowell, you pointed out that if you go to the SPP website, it could be 72, 74%. Now, one thing to keep in mind, that's a snapshot of that particular hour in time. You go to, when you look at that graph and see where the low spots are, if you go to SPP's website in the middle of the night, it's going to be more down in the maybe 5-10%. Their third quarter report that they released here recently said that for the third quarter of the year, the largest contributor to Southwest Power Pool energy was still coal at 30-something%, followed by gas, and wind was only about 24% for the quarter as a whole. So for all the hours that it's 72, 74%, there's a lot of hours that it's not contributing much. That's where these combustion turbines fit into that plan. Bottom line is our units do support the grid. In calendar year 22, our diesel-fired units have been called on 150 times. In fact, Monday night when I was giving the presentation to the City Council, all 4 diesel units were running. Those units, in those 150 times they've been called on to start, have generated credits with SPP after fuel costs of almost $750,000. Our gas-powered units will be called on before the oil-fired units, and usually more hours because conditions that don't quite meet the cost point of the oil-fired units, the cost point for the gas units is lower, so SPP would reach that threshold first, and it would still be in that threshold longer than the oil. So chances are that, and your crystal ball's probably as good as mine, but chances are, if this is how much our diesel units ran, had H5 been available, it would have run even more. So it goes a long way toward helping to pay for its own repairs. So in summary, it is an asset that is a benefit to IPL. It maintains 17 megawatts of capacity that we need to support our obligation with Southwest Power Pool. Repairing it would return this productive asset back into operation. Not only does it provide capacity, but it also supports the internal reliability and resilience of our system. When things go wrong, we have it there available that we can turn to. And even more important, keeping this 17 megawatts available, it opens up the possibilities of things we can do later. It increases the options that we have rather than having to make a quick decision on something that may not be what we would choose long term. Having that 17 megawatts will open up those options that we'll be discussing with you in the months to come. Subject to your questions, that's our presentation, and as we'll be requesting that an endorsement from the PUAB for making these repairs.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Mr. Roder.
Yeah, any idea of a time frame if we send this out, when to expect it back?
We're hoping that we would have it back before summer. One of the problems is we now have a history of delayed decision. GE's not going to give us a slot in their schedule until we have a purchase order approved.
Yeah, totally.
And this is the time of year when everybody's putting their units in for maintenance. So we're competing with everybody else.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I got a quick one.
Okay.
Okay, you were talking about if they'd have about a 20-year lifespan if they were properly maintained. So just as a ballpark, what would you say you'd be looking at cost-wise? Again, ballpark, but cost-wise for that maintenance to keep that up?
Again, depending on how much it operates, how many times it starts, how many hours it accumulates, there are major inspections that come up. You can defer those based on some of your inspection and engineering estimates, but our insurance underwriters get very nervous when you start delaying those inspections beyond too many years. The estimate we had from the engineers 2 years ago was that over the next 10 years, we should expect minimal cost, but from the 10 to 20 year point, we would have a couple of these inspections, and these inspections are in the $1.5 million to $2 million range. Mainly because of just the work of taking the turbine apart, shipping it out to a GE facility and back, and that's a huge part of that cost.
And that's every couple of years?
Should be in the more like in the 5 year range.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I'll ask one more. And then where does the money come from this? For this?
Well, this is an emergency repair that was not budgeted, so we'll be asking the council for an appropriation, which would come out of our reserves.
Okay.
However, recognize that budget is planned capital expenses. There could very well be projects that we can defer out of this fiscal year into the next and see some savings at the end of the year.
Okay.
And we will certainly manage that closely.
Thanks.
Jim, I have a question. How long did that unit set so it had the flat spot possibly?
Over a year.
And there was no way to just turn it for 3 or 4 minutes?
Part of the because of the way that with the generator fault, we had to disconnect a lot of the electrical portion, so we didn't have the turning gear engaged over that time.
Do we regularly run these machines for just to keep things like this from happening in the future?
Well, on for example, H6, we didn't have a turbine or generator failure. We had a failure of a transformer outside, and we're able to energize what's called a turning gear motor, which very slowly rolls that turbine periodically.
Good. Thanks. That's all I've got.
Do you? Go ahead.
I was going to make a motion that we accept their recommendation to get this repaired.
Second.
Okay. I just have one more question. When we had this thing sent out last year, didn't GE mention something about bringing in a turbine on a truck to replace that power temporarily while it was out to be repaired?
There are arrangements you can make for some, but you're going to have to rent it, so you'll have the rental expense.
Okay. All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right. Please call the roll.
Michael Talcott,
Yes.
David McDowell,
Yes.
Sherry Tindall,
Yes.
Anthony Jeremita,
Yes.
Les Boatright,
Yes.
All right. Motion passes. All right. Next up, Finance and Administration. Questions on utility financial reports. Are you taking that one?
I'll take it. You all should have received this with your agenda packet. I don't typically go over a whole bunch of things on these unless something is glaringly off or unusual, which there isn't a lot from the finance. Probably the biggest thing is investment income, which we discussed a little bit last month. Looks really well. That's your biggest variance over the year. Another thing I do whenever I look at these variances is the percentage may look really large, but the dollars aren't. So if it's not, $50,000, even though it's a 200% variance, it's not too concerning to me. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. All the utilities look really good at this time of year. Everything is rolling along. I didn't see anything that was really concerning, but certainly I'm here to answer questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for finance? Hearing none. Thank you.
Welcome.
Municipal services.
Good afternoon. We don't have any major issues to bring before you at this time. We're just plugging along on projects and trying to close out that list that follows the financials and pare that down. Getting very close to being able to invite you down to see lime stabilization as a reality. It's scheduled to go operational in January, and we are currently meeting with vendors to contract out the dispersal and removal of the solids from our facility. So that's always been part of that project, and we're finally to the point where we can meet with vendors and start discussing that cost.
And how long has this been going on?
Entirely too long.
Yeah, it's been a while.
2 years. Lots of material shortages and things along the way. So
It's good that this is finally getting
yes.
wound up. All right, thank you. Water department.
I really didn't have a lot of stuff to present today, so I thought I would go over, Mr. McDowell had some questions that you had presented to us about the billing delinquency questions. You said with inflation and the economic downturn, can I find out how many of our customers are behind on their utility bills? And specifically, I don't know what the city considers delinquent. So I put on there, the short answer is 2 days after the due date listed on the bill. So I went and pulled my bill just to show in his example, but it has current charges due by a certain date. And we give a couple days of like grace period for if it's out here in the box, that it gets entered into it. That's not really public knowledge, but it is now. But so anyway, that's typically how we handle that. If the payment has not been received, a penalty charge of 5% will be added to the next bill. So 2 days later, everybody's going to get a 5% penalty. There's, some folks that doesn't mean anything. They always pay the 5% penalty, and that's 5% on the current amount of that bill. We don't, next month, if they don't pay, we don't put 5% on the additional. It's only on the new portion. It's only the new portion all the way through. So a detailed explanation of the billing cycle and notice of processing timeline is attached, so you should have all gotten a copy. This is very thorough. I think we had to answer this for the Attorney General, or somebody had asked, or there was some kind of a question, and we've used this a lot. So it has a lot of information in here. I think the main thing to think about is we have billing cycles. We bill once a month, so everything has to be turned around within that month. Otherwise, you're just on top of it all the time. It would keep moving. So, folks, if they're really getting shut off, which is the things I'll talk about next, you're probably 60 days past due. You're not just 30 days. The 30 days is the 5%. And, there may be 20% of the folks are in that range anyway. So we really don't start talking about it too much until we start getting into delinquencies, which then the second question, what is the amount of the average delinquency in 2022? For the most current information available, so I looked at, it moves every month. And it depends on whether you're coming out of a hot, dry spell or because we do water, sewer, and the sewer is pretty constant. The only thing changes there is the commercial accounts are billed monthly, so that, but everybody else is on a winter quarter or annual average, so that really doesn't change a lot. But anyway, in October 2022, we had 4,382 residential customers who were up for disconnect with the outstanding balance of $291.46. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of a bill we're talking about. Is about a $300 bill is what folks are on average are behind. This amounted to 8% of the residential customers, which was a 44% decrease from last year's October data. So it's surprisingly, that's a positive thing. In our eyes, that's a good thing. Please find attached a spreadsheet with this information. So I included a spreadsheet, this is one we look at on a monthly basis. And one of the things that the total outstanding balance there last month was $1,463,000. So it sounds like a lot of money. I went back and looked at some data I'd given Adam and the city manager, back in April, right before we started shutting off, it had gotten up to $3.3 million. So to give you a feel, we're half of what that number was. And so things on on a positive side, that number's down. And one thing that I will say, I didn't put in any of these notes, but since the day I walked in the door here, which has been 39 years ago, Missouri Water Company days, we write off 0.5%. So what I'm talking about, we collect 99.95% of what gets billed. So even though these numbers seem excessive at times, just know that on average, we're collecting all but 0.5%, and most people will take that. And the reason why we can do that is because A, we can shut the utilities off, we get their attention, and there's some folks that the only thing they relate to is having their utilities shut off. Sorry to say, but so and when that happens, then that we'll get action out of that. And then if they leave the city, when they come back, that's still waiting for them when they come back. If they decide to move back into Independence, they're probably going to get that sourced on their bill, or unless we have to write it off after a certain period of time, we do turn it over to creditors. So I'm trying to answer your questions, but it helps me talk about other things that probably we don't talk about on a normal monthly basis. Can we get the number of delinquencies for the year 2021, 2019, and 18? And if there's a trend we need to be worried about. So I was able to find out all those except 18, just because we just didn't have good data that was comparable. Information from customers for disconnect for the months June 2019. I just used year ending so that just pick a month and stick with it, so that I would be comparing sort of apples and apples. So 2019, there's 7,176, 2020, 7,992, 2021, 7,011. And the good news is 2022, it's down to 4,060. So again, so it's a difficult item to analyze since it is greatly affected by the weather. A lot of that will change just if you have a hot, dry month. I mean, it's just electricity's up, water's up, sewer stays the same. At least it helps spread us out, keep us even. But so the dry, hot months cause bills to go up and the delinquencies to increase regardless of the economic climate. So anyway, I just thought I would kind of give you an update. And from our perspective, things are looking up. So good questions, though.
Those are good numbers.
Yes, I think so. But
I'd like to ask.
I'll let you decide.
Can I borrow that?
Sure.
Thank you for that clear explanation. I'm curious about the aid that came through because of the pandemic and where the relationship was to those numbers.
Well, I would say that's what greatly affected that $3.3 million going down to 1.5 was because we worked with Community Service League, and they used the monies that the general fund let us use. And of course, it would go water, sewer, and electric just to pay them down. But it was definitely beneficial to not only those customers and anybody that was able to use that money, but it kept it from being on their books for a long period. And that's probably why these numbers it's definitely helped. There's no question in my mind. To what degree, it's hard to put a value on it.
Very good.
Okay, anybody else have any questions?
Thank you.
Hearing none, thank you. IPO, storm restoration planning, mutual aid efforts, and system damage assessments.
Right. We also received questions over the past month, and the question was about where we are with storm restoration planning, our mutual aid efforts, and how we do system damage assessments. Every year, and as part of our NERC requirements, we work with Southwest Power Pool and do contingency analysis of a number of different scenarios. And then one of the things that we produce out of that are what we call operating guides. These are available to our system operators. And basically it says if this line goes out, go through steps A, B, C, D to restore that power or to shift it to alternate areas. If this substation is taken out for whatever reason, if this substation goes out, here's what you have to do to restore that power. So these contingency analysis are things that we do on a regular basis, and the operating guides as responses, those are updated as well, and then made available to our system operators for their reference just in the normal course of operations. Obviously, during storm season, that can get a lot more complicated. I can tell you that the mutual aid system is alive and well. We have both received and given aid over the past year. When we had the tornadoes that came through back in the spring, we did have two of our fellow utilities that came and gave us assistance. And when the hurricane hit Florida, we had a crew that went and helped restore power down there. So the mutual aid program is managed by Missouri Public Utility Alliance. So part of our membership, that helps us get access to that. And like I said, we give and receive aid, and it's a great program that helps all of us support each other. As far as our system damage assessments, what happens in when there's an emergency or there's an outage, our operator in the control room, they're probably the ones, other than the resident impacted, our operators are the ones that find out about it first. We have one of our employees that's on the clock 24/7 is a position called troubleman. They're an experienced lineman, and what they do is they're out in the footprint somewhere, and the dispatcher will get an alert of an outage. The troubleman will be sent to the scene, and before anybody else has time to respond, the troubleman's there assessing what the problem is, where is the damage, how extensive is it? Is it something that he can correct on the spot, or does he need one crew, two crews? What type of equipment are they going to need? He funnels that information back to our control room, and then the duty superintendent is fed that information, and then they can make the decision as to how many people to call in, what type of equipment is needed, and get those folks on the scene as quickly as we can, and with already have an eyes-on assessment of what the damage is. This is what we do on a normal basis. In the case of a major outage, we have the option of calling in an additional troubleman so that we can have two of them on the scene and taking care of multiple contingencies. Our superintendents are also equipped to do that as well. So if there's if it's a major disaster, a big winter storm, we could have multiple people out on the street within a short amount of time, making those assessments and getting the crews to where they're most effective and most efficiently used.
Any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
My first question is, how do you turn on the mic? Does IPL do anything to identify critical infrastructure? Like if a circuit goes down, there might be certain things on there, hospitals, whatever, on that circuit that they need to be identified that are out.
Our community is so diverse that it makes that a little difficult. But yes, we've got in our circuit books, we've got identified. This circuit has Centerpoint Hospital. This one has the manufacturing units down in the caves. So we do have some of those identified.
Because in my past career, one of the things I had to do was identify all the critical infrastructure. And when KCPL acquired Aquila, they gave me their list of critical infrastructure, and there were Taco Bells, which might be critical to somebody, but not the overall scope. Things like that were in there that they thought it was important, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't as critical as a hospital, a dialysis clinic.
Right. Ours would be typically things like the hospitals, the schools, the police department, the fire stations, really, critical infrastructure that keeps our community going. Unfortunately, dialysis clinics and some of those have popped up just about on any circuit could have something somewhere in it, and that makes that piece difficult. But when those are permitted, they're told up front that you need to have a backup source of power or an alternate location you can send your folks to, because we can't guarantee continuous power 365 days a year, or if an outage, we can't guarantee how fast we're going to get it back. So
it's like nursing homes are required to have backup generators. A lot of them don't, and they call wanting to know, when am I going to have my power back on?
Exactly.
When you follow the rules and get a backup generator that runs more than just one part of your facility. Okay, well, I appreciate that information. I was the one that asked to have it on the agenda because I was curious with us moving into winter weather, kind of what the process was or procedure was here in Independence if we got into a situation where it was a pretty bad storm. And, they're talking in Buffalo, I think it was 2 to 4 feet of snow on Sunday for that game. So, we're not going to get 2 to 4 feet here, but if we get an ice storm or something hit us, what's the procedure you all go through?
And I will add that one of the big concerns right now around the country is the availability of supplies, transformers and poles and all the rest. Part of that mutual aid program is also a network that if somebody has an emergency, they can reach out to the rest of the group and say, does anyone have one of these? You know, we'll replace it as soon as we can. And there have been a number of times when we've helped out another utility with a request like that.
Does IPL have any kind of strategic alliances or anything with, say, manufacturers, vendors?
We have some well-established relationships. However, they're all facing the same shortage of material. We've got vendors who we normally would have, say, a transformer or some new poles or cable within a couple of weeks. We're getting quotes now that are 2 and 3 years if they even give us a delivery date. So it's a struggle.
Yeah, pre-pandemic.
Sure.
With Coolman was who did the single and pole and pad mounted transformers for KCP&L. And I worked on that strategic alliance so that if we declared an emergency, they'd shut their plant down and make only our stuff. And that way we could get it in an emergency. And we declared it 3 or 4 times.
We're not quite as big enough a player as Evergy to get that kind of a deal.
But I didn't know if there was any vendor alliances you had like that you could get stuff fairly quick, and you answered that. So
now, one of the things we have done with keeping that in mind is our engineering and our transmission and distribution group. They're working together to look at kind of think outside the box. If we have an outage and it's a transformer size that we don't have and can't get, what do?
yeah,
Can we split the circuit and feed it from 2 different directions? Can we temporarily use a transformer of a different rating? And we're already doing those analysis now, kind of thinking those outside the box solutions.
Yeah, we looked at transformers for when the Royals went to the World Series the first time in 2014. They have a specific dry type transformer that happens to be 2 right across the parking lot at Arrowhead that would work. But getting those 2 to say, yeah, you can use them, that never happened. So they had replacements that were like 200 yards away, but unless they did it under the cover of darkness, they were never going to get them. All right, well, thank you.
Any other questions? Speaking of it might be a good thing to discuss the cold weather rule, what that entails since we're getting
Sure.
into that weather.
Our cold weather rule is that if the temperature is going to be below 32 degrees in the next 24 hours, we won't disconnect your average delinquent. Residential. If it's a commercial account, they're still subject to disconnect. And if they're an account that has had a payment arrangement and broken that payment arrangement, they're going to get a notice.
Okay. I had one other thing. When Mr. Montgomery's speaking about the billing, it reminded me, I meant to ask you this last week. I got a text from somebody who had gotten a phone call, cut off, about cutting off their power. And it came from a Vietnam. Everything about the message was correct. I checked it out, but it said it was Vietnam. And I'm curious as to if the number that we call from just happens to match the country code for Vietnam, and it comes across that way. It looked like it may have been like a toll-free number, but it was I don't know if I can provide you with the number if you like, but
No, I'm familiar with this issue.
Okay.
We looked at this. We tested our system a couple times after that, and we really couldn't get it to replicate that
okay.
situation. And we used a couple different mobile carriers for that as well. But we did ask our vendor to see if we could have it show from like the 325 number
Right.
going forward. And I don't think we know the answer to that right now, but
Okay.
that would probably be helpful. But yeah, we looked at that and we just couldn't get it to replicate.
Okay.
The-
Well, I checked it out myself, and like I said, I listened to the message. Everything was correct. Everything seemed legit, but I could see where people could kind of freak out, you know.
I agree, and it was a legit voicemail and message and everything else. And just unfortunately couldn't get it to occur again for us to identify the problem.
Right.
The
Okay.
best advice we have for our customers is if they get a call like that, don't panic, but hang up and then call customer service and find out, or look up your account online and check it out, or come here and make the payment. Don't ever, if they ask you that, if they say that you're going to be disconnected unless you go down to Quick Trip and get $500 in gift cards, that's a scam.
Right. And that's what I told them. I said, don't call IPL, call the utility center. Don't. Okay. Thank you. Deputy City Manager, do you have anything?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Upcoming items. We got the development of future generation, finance and administration, and 10-year financial projections for IPL coming up. Board member comments. Does any board member have anything to say? Questions, comments?
I would. So as interested as all of us are in these processes, most people in Independence interact with that bill and, their thermostat, their taps, their flushers, and they don't want to have to think about it further than that. So that phone call situation, it would be really great if that never happened again. I don't know how your carrier can customize the identity that comes up, but that's a really good one that would instill confidence. And as much as we can do on the bill that adds clarity, you got 2 days, if drive it over or get it in the mail, whatever it is, you don't want that red frame on your next bill. Let's go, let's get it straightened out. But I think that I'm going to contact our communications folks about putting out more conservation of energy through the winter stuff on our Facebooks and all the social media so that people turn that thermostat down at night and save a few bucks, and then we won't have as many delinquencies, hopefully.
Anybody else have anything? Hearing none, I believe we're adjourned.
Good job.
Thank you, everybody.